Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at the top 5 mistakes I see Cypher players making whilst playing Valorant. I've played a lot of Cypher both in the beta and once the full games come out, so I've made all these mistakes before too. If we learn from these mistakes, it will take our Cypher gameplay to the next level. I haven't put these mistakes in any specific order, but it's essential to cut these out to get the most out of Cypher. The first mistake I see all the time is poor tripwire placement, specifically the height of the tripwire when it's placed. To understand why some placements are so poor, we need to think about the role of the tripwire and what it actually should be doing. On defense, you use the tripwires to slow enemy pushes and to stop any sneaky pushes into unmanned sites. On attack, they are mainly for protecting the flank or holding the bomb site after a plant, but we'll talk more about this later. But in essence, on both defense and offense, tripwires are used to gather information about enemy player locations. Now we can get back onto the placement of the tripwires. Yes, it may be true that it's more likely an enemy will walk into a tripwire if it's super close to the ground, as it will be outside their peripheral vision, but by placing it close to the ground, you're giving vigilant enemies the advantage, as they can now sneak into areas by jumping over the tripwires which you thought were protected. You are letting the enemy players use your own utility against you. Even if your tripwires are spotted more often than when they're at waist height, where they can't be jumped over or ducked under, they give the enemy player a choice. Either they have to destroy it or turn back, either alerting you the player has moved into that area, or you've successfully stopped an enemy rotating or flanking you. Also, when placing the tripwires, make sure they aren't next to a raised platform, as an enemy can use these to jump over them. The next super common mistake I see is a pretty obvious one: poor camera placement. When you're placing your cam, especially on defense, you have to balance how much information the camera gives you to how likely it is that the enemy players will spot the camera. Sadly, in most cases, the more information a camera gives you, the more likely it is to be spotted by the enemies. Now the game's been out for a couple of weeks, players are starting to learn the default camera spots. I've even been in a few games where players will pre-fire the invisible camera just by knowing the likely spots that a Cypher might place it. In the first few rounds of a game, you need to work out how observant the enemy team is, and then you want to adapt your camera placements to that. The biggest mistake around camera placements though is a Cypher player always putting the cam back in exactly the same spot every round and expecting a different result. If the cam is destroyed once, it's going to get shot every single time you put it there, so you really need to mix up the placements. Of course, some spots are much worse than others, but having less information for the whole round is much better than losing your camera instantly and having no information at all. If you want some tips on camera spots, check out this video I made going over the best 5 spots in every map. Third mistake is about attacking with Cypher. Everyone knows Cypher is much better on defense, but that doesn't make him useless on attack. It's sometimes difficult to know when and where you should be using your utility, but in most cases I just see Cypher players keeping it all in their pocket and just being a gun on attack. One common way people talk about playing Cypher on attack is using all his utility once the bomb is planted. Using him like this can maybe win you a round or two a game by locking down the site from a retake, but really this style of play doesn't get the most out of his utility. In a normal game, how many times does the planted spike actually win you a round, especially in just an average lobby? Maybe a quarter to a third of rounds come down to protecting a plant? By playing this way, you're limiting yourself to only affecting 2 or 3 rounds on attack, which in most cases your team would win anyway without your utility. On attack, you should be your team's lurker, watching the flanks and stopping anyone sneaking up on your team. Your kit is perfect for it. You can lock down 2 lanes with your tripwires and use your camera to safely see into areas or let you watch 2 flanks at once. By doing this, you enhance your team's push by giving them the confidence to take site with a 4-man push rather than having to worry about their flanks. I know this playstyle isn't always the most fun, as for some of the round you're just waiting for the enemy team to flank, but this playstyle will mean your utility will have an impact on every single round, rather than just the ones where your team has already planted the spike and taken site. Watching the flanks gets the most out of Cypher's camera and tripwires, but this still leaves us with his Cypher cages. On attack, you pretty much have to use these cages as smokes. You want to try and throw your cages from safety to block lines of sight. By doing this, you save one of your team's stronger, more easily placed smokes to be used further back in sight or later in the round. You need to try and learn a few Cypher cage lineups for attack to get the most out of him. Sometimes you can use your cages to allow your team to safely rotate past commonly held sight lines. For example, the A short on bind, if your team needs to cross over to B site, you can use your cage to let them rotate without being shot from someone holding the corridor from teleporter. The next point ties in quite nicely with the last. It's all about a player's overall playstyle with Cypher. His kit just isn't suited to playing aggressively. He's all about gathering intel and watching the flanks. Not only is his kit not suited to playing aggressively, it actively discourages it. by having to both personally activate his cages and be alive to use his camera. If you die early as Cypher, you better have put down your tripwires, otherwise your utility is useless. There's been many occasions where I've been playing with a Cypher who puts down a great setup on defence and then just walks straight past it to aggressively push the enemies at the start of the round. Your setup is meant to give you an advantage, but by playing in front of it, you're letting the enemies pretty much get rid of your whole setup before they even push into the site by eliminating the only person who can operate it. By using Cypher's kit to trap and outplay the enemy, you'll be able to get great outplays. You just need a little bit of patience at the start of the round and let the enemies come to you. If you want to play aggressively, which is still debatable on defence with any agent, choose one that will help you take fights, like Breach or Phoenix, not one who is required to stay alive as long as possible to get the most out of his utility. The final mistake is a Cypher player just being way too predictable. I touched on this when I was talking about the camera, but this problem is big enough to warrant its own section. There are some great setups on both defence and attack, but if you use a setup once and the enemy team finds and destroys all your utility, you have to be able to adapt. Even if your setup works perfectly one round, the enemies now know where it is and how to counter it the next round. Sometimes it's worth moving your entire setup either further forward to catch the enemy pushes before they even start, or bring the setup further back into sight. This type of setup may not get the most out of your utility, but if the optimal setup is destroyed and countered by the other team every single round, at least by using your utility this way, you're getting some worth out of it. Another thing I don't see often enough is Cypher players playing on different sites within a single game. If you're always playing on a specific site all game, the enemy know that you're there and can either target the other site or approach more cautiously when attacking the site that you're on. By mixing up the site you're on throughout the game, you're keeping the enemies on their toes, and by doing this you're wasting their time without even having to use your utility. If they don't know for sure which area you're playing in, then they have to play much more cautiously so they don't get caught and trapped by you for an easy kill. If you want to take your Cypher gameplay to the next level, check out these playlists or my channel in general, as there's loads of content there about the best possible setups and playstyles as Cypher. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. We're almost at 100 subs now, which is amazing. Thanks for watching!